Hi everyone, welcome to another Lanzarote information video. I'm Mike from Lanzarote Information. And today we're going to be talking about Lanzarote Airport. And I'm going to take you back through the history of the airport, which has had four distinct phases. The first phase was when it was a military airfield with a grass runway. The second phase was when a very small terminal building was created, which you can still see today because it's where the airport museum is located. The third phase was the very small terminal that was built in the late 60s, early 70s, with a lot of help and input from Cesar Manrique. That is still there today as well. It's known as Terminal 2, and it's where we get inter-island flights. And the final phase was what you see today, the wonderful international direct flight hub that we have here on the island that can cope with up to 8 million passengers a year. But before we get into that, let's just wind the clock back to pre-1940s. And the only way people could get on or off the island in those days was by boat. And there was a twice weekly steamer that would take people from Lanzarote to Gran Canaria and on to Tenerife, and it took them the best part of a day. If they then wanted to go back to the mainland of Spain, they had to get on another ship which would take them all the way up to Cadiz, and if, for example, they were travelling to Madrid, they could then get a train from Cadiz to Madrid. The whole trip from Lanzarote to Madrid would take about 10 days. It's a little bit different these days because we can fly direct several times a day from here in Lanzarote to Madrid, and it takes about 2 hours and 10 minutes. Now, you're probably aware that Spain was neutral during the Second World War, so they weren't a combatant nation. But nevertheless, Franco had built up a sizable military for the country. And it was decided in 1939 that the military needed an airfield in Lanzarote as part of the defence of the Canary Islands. So the plot of land was built that is where the airport is now. And it had previously been called Guasimeta, and that was the name given to the new military airfield that was created there in 1941. It was called Guasimeta Military Airfield. And all it was a long grass runway with a bunch of Nissan huts in which they could put the aircraft and the stores and where the crews and the ground crews lived. Now, the first aircraft that ever landed there was a Junkers Ju-52, and that was in 1941. Now, Guasimeta was a military-only airfield from 1941 until 1946. But in 1946, it was opened up to commercial traffic for the first time. And initially, all that came in and out of there commercially was one flight a week. And that flight would go from here to Fuerteventura and then on to Gran Canaria and finally on to Tenerife. So once a week you could get a flight to Tenerife, and from there you could connect on to Madrid. Bear in mind this is in the propeller era, so a flight to Madrid was quite a substantial undertaking in those days. Now, all that changed from that point, from 1946 up until the late 50s, was that the frequency of those commercial flights which joined the islands increased. And by the mid to late 50s, there were 4 flights a week that would go from Lanzarote and would take you to each of the other islands as needed. Now, bear in mind, at this point, there was still a grass runway, and that caused a number of problems. I mean, the most obvious of which was that we couldn't take larger aircraft because they were simply too heavy by this point to land on grass runways. But the other big problem was weather-related, and in 1959, the island had a particularly wet winter, and that resulted in the airport being closed for 3 months. So in 1960, for the first time ever, the airport runway was completely paved over, and that really caused a dramatic increase in the number of flights coming in and out of Guasimeta Lanzarote Airport. Now, through the early 60s, there were still only local flights going on, albeit all year round, but the number of passengers using those flights jumped to around 10,000 a year. So at this point, we had a long and very effective paved runway. There was a tiny little apron where the aircraft could park. There weren't any air bridges or anything like that. There was a very small terminal building with a control tower on top of the terminal building. And in the terminal building was one check-in desk, a big weighing scales, one with a dial rather than digital, where people could weigh their suitcases before boarding, a little ticket office where you could buy a ticket that they would hand write for you to use. Now you can see all of that because that building has been restored beautifully, and it is now the Lanzarote Airport Museum, and you can drive in, park your car in the car park there, which is the old apron where the aircraft used to park, and walk in and see the bar, the control tower, the radio equipment that they had there, the weighing machine and the check-in desk and all of that stuff, as well as loads of other really interesting memorabilia. So that's what Lanzarote Airport looked like in the mid-60s. But by 1967, there was an inkling that tourism could be quite big for the island. And it was important, it was agreed that it was important at that point to seek to get direct flights from Northern Europe into Lanzarote to create it as a tourist destination. And an island plan was created in 1967, and that included making big changes to the airport and making it more tourism friendly. So a brand new terminal building was built with a lot of input from Cesar Manrique, and it was absolutely beautiful little building. It had loads of Lanzarote green in it. It had a series of check-in desks similar to the ones we have today. The luggage system wasn't automated, it just went through to guys who stood behind the desks and took them off out to the aircraft. There were seating areas, there were lovely drapes on the ceiling of the terminal, and again you can see the terminal as it was pretty much today, because it's now Terminal 2, which is the terminal we use for domestic flights between the Canary Islands. And it still operates in the same way as a kind of walkthrough. So if you use Terminal 2 now, you'll get the same feel people had when they were travelling from Lanzarote in the 1970s. You park your car at the front, you walk through the terminal building, drop your case, walk out the other side and onto the aircraft and up the steps. So that terminal building opened in 1970, and the first international flight arrived the same year, which was a charter flight from Germany. So we saw another big jump in passengers to 212,000 in the year 1970. Now I need to give you a quick caveat here. When we say 212,000 passengers, the actual number of people is probably half that, because a passenger gets counted twice, once on their way in and once again on their way out. So that would suggest around 100,000 people travelled through the airport in the year 1970. Now, as we know, historically, tourism took off massively in Lanzarote, and that saw a dramatic increase in the number of flights coming in and out of the island and the number of passengers transiting through that airport terminal. That 200,000 people became 800,000 in 1980, and it became 2.5 million in 1990. Something needed to be done. But before I tell you about that, just a quick pitch here for our weekly newsletter. If you're a true Lanzarote lover, you want to immerse yourself in all things Lanzarote, we produce a weekly newsletter which goes out every Friday and has done since 2008. And in it we share all the latest news from the island. We share lots of stuff about our lives on the island and what it's like living here. We bring you up to date with everything that's changed on our website, and we give you all the photos that we've taken during our week in Lanzarote. If you're interested in that, there's a link below in the description. You can go and see what it's like, find out about it, and you can even download a copy to see what it looks like in real life. So we'd love to have you reading our weekly newsletter and receiving it in your inbox every Friday. But let's get back to the story. So we've got to 1990, 2.5 million people travelling through this very small terminal, beautifully designed by Cesar Manrique, but very small terminal on the island. Again, something needed to be done. And the decision was taken to create a new terminal which was fit for purpose, with proper immigration services, with automated luggage handling systems, with belts and all that kind of stuff, and many, many more check-in desks to accommodate the number of flights which at this point were starting to come to the island. The new terminal building opened in 1999. Now, I still think of it as the new part of the airport, but it's been there for 25 years now, believe it or not. And in a minute, I'll talk about the things that are going to change in the future at the airport, because there are some quite big plans to make it even more efficient than it currently is. So the new terminal building was largely funded by the European Union. It came with the whole row of check-in desks you see now, a dedicated security area, a duty-free shop, lots of shops, bars and restaurants as you walk down it, a VIP lounge, but it still stayed very Lanzarote, if that makes sense. There were two terraces, and there still are two terraces where you can go out and have a last cigarette before the flight, or sit in the sun and enjoy a beer. And it still has that kind of chilled vibe that I think carried over from the original terminal building. A whole new control tower was built, which is a very cool building. You can see it clearly from the car park in the airport. New runway lighting was put in, and for the first time Lanzarote had a whole series of air bridges where where you can walk onto the aircraft directly from the terminal building through the air bridge. New fire station was built to house the fire trucks that live there, and a new fuel depot was created. And I don't know if you've ever seen the small yellow tanker that is quite often anchored just off the runway in Lanzarote. What that is doing is pumping aviation fuel through pipes that run under the ocean into the airport, under the runway, and into the fuel bunker at the airport. And you'll see that there, I don't know, once every couple of weeks, once every 3 weeks, while it's topping off those tanks. So that opened in 1999. It was a great success, and inevitably we've seen once again this massive and continuing growth in tourism and visitors to the island. So in the first year it opened, around 5 million passengers transited through it. By 2019, it became 7.5 million passengers, and last year it was 8 million passengers. And interestingly, 8 million was the original maximum capacity planned for the airport. So what about the future? Well, Lanzarote Airport has had some issues in recent years, but they've been caused by things that nobody could really have foreseen. I don't think anybody foresaw back in 1999 that half of the volume of business that we have, the volume of visitors that we have, would come from the United Kingdom. And of course, they couldn't have foreseen that the United Kingdom would leave the European Union. So the airport, in its original setup, was really only designed for a relatively small number of non-EU passengers. And unfortunately, we now have a very high volume of non-EU passengers, and the setup doesn't work very well. We don't have enough Policia Nacional officers to deal with them, although that is the fault of the government, because we could have seen this coming some time ago. And the other issue we have is that there aren't enough taxis in the San Bartolome area to deal with it. So those are some of the things, but those are just specifics that can be overcome in a relatively short space of time. But they are also part of the future planning for stuff that's going to happen over the next 5 years. Other issues we've got are more minor, but they will be addressed with this new plan over the next 5 years. They include things like we're one of the few busy international airports in the world that still use cars to guide the aircraft to where they need to park. And if you've ever looked out of the aircraft window when you've landed, there's always a little yellow car with flashing lights parked at the end of the turnoff from the runway, and they guide the aircraft to where they're going to park. So what's going to happen over the next 5 years? Well, there's a pretty ambitious plan, and very expensive, by AENA, the airport's authority, to update and upgrade all the facilities, and also some of the major infrastructure of the airport. For the first time, Terminals 1 and 2 will be joined. Currently, if you want to go from T1 to T2, you actually have to come out of T1, walk along the front and then go into T2. But you'll now be able to do that inside. And T2 will have air bridges for the first time as well. So that will increase the number of air bridges which can be interchanged according to whether it's a jet aircraft or one of the small Binter or Canary Fly prop aircraft. As well as new runway lights, there will also be a new automated taxi light system which will enable aircraft to follow the lights to park rather than follow a little yellow vehicle. The flow through security and immigration is going to be greatly improved so that it should speed up that whole part of the process. And the aim is to future-proof the airport by giving it the ability to cope with up to 10 million passengers a year. I don't think for a moment we will reach that, but they probably said that in 1999 about the 8 million figure. But I really can't see tourism increasing much beyond where it is now, but we'll see. So the work on those next jobs starts next year, 2026, and will take about 5 years to complete. Now, I know from previous experience where changes have been made to the airport, AENA are very good at doing that without disrupting the existing traffic. So they will do it section by section, and you probably won't even notice a lot of the work because it will be going on behind big screens. Now, I mentioned at the start that the airport was known originally as Guasimeta Military Airfield. And when it became a commercial airfield, it retained that name, so it became Guasimeta Lanzarote Airport. But it was given the call sign way back when, in 1946, the call sign was ACE, ACE for Arrecife. And I've always thought that's just the coolest call sign, ACE. But the airport itself changed its name in 2019 and it became Aeropuerto César Manrique Lanzarote. So it's the Lanzarote Airport of César Manrique. And of course it was done to honour César Manrique's influence on the island, his art and all the stuff he did, including the major contribution he made to a part of the airport back in the day. But it's retained its very cool call sign and it's still known as ACE. So if you found this video to be ace, please give us a like. It really does help us. Thank you so much for watching. We produce a video like this every Tuesday, another one which is a walkabout on the island on a Thursday, and every Saturday morning I do the Lanzarote news, bringing you up to speed with the latest of goings on the island. So if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so and you'll be notified as we produce each of those 3 weekly videos. Thanks so much for watching once again and see you soon. Bye for now. Bye.